if you find the audio is poor after this presentation, you may want to consider investing in a headset that works with your equipment. It does make it a lot easier. It cuts out some of the background noise you might have where you are, and everything I can tell you is much clearer. And the other thing I mentioned is to keep the presentation as interactive as possible. Sean will periodically pop a poll up during the presentation to get some kind of response or see if there's any need to go over something again. Also be aware there will be a survey at the end of this. We'd like to have your feedback. Tell us how we did, how the webinar was, and all that kind of thing. So unless there's some questions, one of you wants to raise your hand with a question before we get started, or type in a question, I'm going to ask Sean to go ahead and start.
Okay.
So
great.
Sean, the session's
Thanks,
yours.
Terry. Thank you so much. So just a reminder, if you have a comment or a question, you can either type it in the question box or you can raise your little icon hand and we'll know that you want to say something and we can unmute you. So there's an automatic default for muting all of you, and I don't know why GoToWebinar sets it up that way, but I think they assume we're going to have 250 people on these webinars, so we don't want everybody all talking at once. So but by all means, throw your hand up and we will open the airwaves to you if you want to comment or ask a question. So this is the first webinar for us this fall, and we've just purchased this GoToWebinar software, and if you are in a position where you want to show a webinar to any of your constituents, we are more than happy to help set it up with you. If you want to give it a try, you can use our account and just sort of play around with it until you get used to the features on it. It's as Jerry said, we hope this is one of many that we're going to continue to do. And we also have a GoToMeeting license as well, or subscription, so that allows for a small group collaborative approach. And in that case, you can see everybody there. You can see their webcam, and you can see what they who's on the call. And so a little bit different, more for collaborative work. And so we're absolutely happy to help host those or set those up for you if you want to do that. So thanks, Jerry, for the introduction, and thank you to everybody for your interest in logic models. I really did not know that there would be this much interest at all in this concept. Either you've heard of them and you have wanted to know more, or you're already engaged in them and you want to share some of the things that you've learned about them. But as you'll learn as we go through this, I have been an absolute nut about logic models over the latter part of my career, and I'm happy to share the tool with anybody who's willing to listen. But just a little commercial about who is hosting this event. The Oregon Conservation Partnership is made up of the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils and the Association of Conservation Districts, Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, and OCEAN. We call ourselves the Oregon Conservation Partnership when we do things together, and we are funded through OWEB. So we want to hear from you about the kinds of topics that you might want to use this tool for in the future, and absolutely give us feedback on what went well and what didn't work so well for you as we go through today's webinar. So I want to do a practice first. I want to test my polling system. So I'm going to put a poll up on the screen just to get us interacting a little bit and to learn a little bit more about how you're accessing this. So with any luck, you see a poll in front of you that asks you to let me know, okay, you're already getting it, how you got onto this, whether you're doing it on your laptop or your desktop. In a practice session, I've had people use their tablets and their smartphones. It works well too. But it looks like the vast majority of you are using your laptop and your desk computer. With any luck, you see the poll results. And I'm doing this in part to show you a little bit about the technology so you get a sense of what's possible with this. So here's what I'm hoping to cover in the next half an hour or so. Many of you already know what a logic model is, but for those who don't, I want to just briefly give you a definition of what they are and also try and do a little bit of a sales job about why they're a useful tool and why they're a more and more increasing need to know how to put them together and present them. I've got some examples, and I'll show you the basic structure of what a logic model consists of. And as we have time, we may have to push this into another webinar later, but I hope that we can get into talking about how logic models really lead us into the area of evaluation and measuring impact.
Sean,
yes.
We have a question from Brenda Sanchez.
Okay. Hi, Brenda. Go ahead. Can you unmute her? Or
I unmuted her.
Okay, good.
Brenda, are you there? Brenda?
Let's see if we can. Sorry, Brenda, we can't hear you. Oh, her hand is
Brenda,
down. So.
Okay, her phone was muted also. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. As we have time, I want to take the time to really make the link between evaluation and logic models. At the end, I'll show you a slide where there's some resources that you can go and do some brief online courses and some more templates. And as you have questions, just as we thought Brenda might just then, feel free to ask anything as we go along. I don't want to lose you and just keep blathering on without you following what I'm saying. So this is my second and final poll. For my own information, I'd like you to tell me what your basic evaluation, your experience is with logic models. So I've never heard of them but never seen one, have dealt with them before, have engaged with one in the past, and so on. Okay, it looks like most of you have submitted your poll. Let me just close it and I'll share with you the outcomes. So about 25% of you or so, a quarter of you have never heard of them until now, which is good that I'm going through the basics then. Some have heard of it but never really seen one, and about 30% of you have been involved in creating one. So it's great. We have a wide range of experience. So I'm looking forward to those of you who have had experience to share your stories and your experiences with maybe a little testimony of what works for them and what causes you problems when you're doing it and so on. Okay, very good. Every good concept begins with a creation story, and I want to just briefly share with you my own sort of discovery of this tool. I had worked as a program manager for various organizations over the first 25 years or so of my career and never had heard of a logic model, never seen one, and somebody introduced me to this tool, and I must say it was a life-changing experience. It allowed me to understand and be able to tell my story of my program in a way that I had never been able to do before. And since then, I've become bit of an ambassador for logic models and working with organizations to help facilitate the process of them creating a team-wide logic model or an organizational model, and I'll show you an example of one of those as we go along. So if it's such a great thing, what makes it so great? So just a little bit of context first. It's probably no surprise to anyone that in the field of conservation, it used to be okay that we would talk about the things that we were doing in our work. So, we met with landowners, we signed agreements, we partnered, we conducted, we removed, we inventoried, we built. So these are things that you all have been familiar with in your reporting. We restored so many miles, we removed, and so on. And those are really important results to report on in any grant report or when you're reporting to stakeholders. We've gone a little bit further in conservation, and now we're measuring and reporting on mostly biological indicators. These are related to water quality and quantity, population, habitat, and so on. And the way we define these now is we say, okay, we're going to find our biological indicators, we're going to define them, we're going to go out and collect data, we're going to synthesize the data, analyze it, and write up the results. But the trick now, and maybe what we need to go to the next step and do a better job of, is linking those indicators or those measurements to the interventions that we are doing in the field. And I use the word intervention, we borrow it from the social services field. It means your projects. We think of interventions because we think of ourselves as people who are in the business of creating change. So we're doing something, expecting some kind of result as it relates to our work. And we know from the literature and we know from our experiences that the conservation field does not have a long history of doing this kind of linkages between what we do and the observed results. If you go to an American Evaluation Association conference, for example, where there's 2,000 evaluators walking around, there's thousands of presentations on education and social services and healthcare. But there's a very small community of evaluators that are focused on conservation. And that's just because it's a new field relative to all these other ones. And the good news is that we can learn a lot from those other fields about how to talk about the impacts of our work. So the main question that we need to think about and need to move ourselves ahead on is, how has our intervention contributed to the status of the resource? So if we think of ourselves as what we call change agents, that means we expect something to be different as a result of our work. So that means that we're carrying around with us some assumptions about the things that we decide to do, the interventions that we decide to invest our time and money in. So the thinking is sort of usually implicitly in our minds, if we do this, then we have a belief or a trust or a hypothesis that something will happen as a result of that. And sometimes these assumptions or these linkages that we make between our interventions and the outcomes are based on research. And sometimes they're based on a theory that we have and that we're really doing kind of action research to see if in fact our actions lead to those kind of results. And often these assumptions or these linkages are articulated, but sometimes they're not. And so a logic model is a way of showing graphically what these linkages are, these assumptions between what we do in the field and in our jobs and what we hypothesize will happen as a result. So it's a planning tool that we do up front when we're thinking about putting a program together. What's the series of if-then relationships between what we do, what happens in the short term that will lead to longer term impacts. And we know that funders more and more want to know how our intervention has led to the long-term impacts. And so we need to show that we have done some thinking and we have a theory about these linkages, because we can't always prove, even if we do measure these biological indicators, we can't necessarily prove that it was us who made the difference, because there's a lot of things that influence long-term outcomes, as we all No. And so a graphic, like a logic model, will help us show what our theory of these connections is. So logic models, you may have heard them, they call different things. They're theory of change model, program logic, concept map, and so on. But they're all the same sort of thing. And they look something like this. This is a super, super simple example just to show you the structure of how a logic model is put together. So on this particular example, I'm borrowing from the field of education. And I'm not in conservation right now. This is about a school district trying to make a difference for kids. If you look at the bottom, you know that the objective of this particular program that we're talking about right now is to increase the percentage of kids who are not held back, that are move on to the next grade level on time. So on the right-hand side, you see that long-term goal. Okay? And on the left-hand side, you see the initial investment. And so the little yellow arrows are all the linkages between the things. You could consider it chronological, but it's more about the series of outcomes that you see. So if time and money, then we can set up a tutoring program. In this case, it's 3 hours a week for a school year for 50 kids. And if we do that, then students who are struggling can be tutored. And if that, then they will learn and improve their skills and get better grades, and then they will move on to the next grade level at a time. So whoever designed this program has this theory that tutoring is the intervention that is ultimately going to lead to this outcome that is desired in the long term. So I don't know if you can start to see now how this might relate to conservation. I wanted to show you this one from education because I knew that we all could relate to it. But I'll start to show you some other examples that build on this simple example. So here's the basic framework of a linear logic model. So program investments are on the left. These are what we invest. It's usually time, staff time, budget, grant dollars, etc. And this middle section describes the things that we do. These are what we call outputs. So we put on workshops, we do tours, etc. And then in the outcome arena, you have short, medium, and longer term outcomes. These are the results, what happened among your target audience or in your target resource as a result of what you did. So you can see that short term, especially dealing with education programs, is what did people learn as a result of coming to your event? The second one in the medium term is what did they do as a result of what they learned? Did they change their practice or behavior? Did they apply what they learned on the ground? And finally, that links to the longer term impact. It is what they did leading to this longer term impact. And again, I'll say this more than once here, longer term impacts are sometimes hypothetical. In other words, we can't always prove that it was us that made this long-term impact, even if we were to observe it. But what this logic model shows is that we have a theory that what we're going to invest and what we're going to do is going to lead ultimately to this goal through this path. I hope I'm not going too fast for folks. Okay, so I found this example in some literature, and it absolutely relates to the work that councils and districts and others do. It's a simple logic model for an outreach program, and it begins on the left with state lottery funds, state agency funds, experts and volunteers. Staff time could be included there as well. The activities are workshops, demonstrations, and newsletters about stream bank fencing and riparian buffers. And it leads to increased knowledge, which leads landowners to begin to restrict cattle access with fencing and buffers. Now note that there are other influences on landowners other than education. They may have incentives, they may have disincentives for their behavior. So there could be another logic model for another kind of intervention. But this one is just about education. And that, of course, then leads to the water quality indicators that are there. So you can begin to see, I hope, that creating a graphic like this does several things. It helps you as the program manager and your staff understand the underlying assumptions between the impacts that you're trying to affect. And it also communicates to others in a one-page document, what is your program about? And what are the beliefs that underlie your decisions about why you're doing the things you're doing? It's pretty powerful. It's powerful for funding, for grant proposals, and it's powerful for a team to do together. So I'm just going to stop.
Sean,
And yes, I'm hearing some
Sean,
breathing. Go ahead, Jerry.
Sean, Neil has a comment.
Okay.
Let me. Neil, you are unmuted.
Hi, Neil.
Neil, you need to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Neil. Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, so my comment was just I've seen in logic models where activities are actually called out at that highest level, where your activities, as you said, are your what you're implementing. Outputs are the result of that, and then I think, as you were alluding to earlier, outcomes are where there's going to be external factors that come into that. And so, for example, if your activity is purchasing land easements, then your output would be acres conserved, but your outcome that you might be driving towards is watershed health or
Yeah.
Something like that.
Right. So I'm really glad you pointed that out, because this is only one iteration of a logic model, and different people use different definitions for these various headings. And it's really, the terminology isn't as important as the links, as those yellow arrows between them. So you can absolutely use outputs in a different way to show acres restored and so on. But those would need to link to a longer term outcomes. Yeah,
Great
point. Great point. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I am going to ask you to comment in a minute in your box, but so you can be thinking about how you might want to respond to that. Okay, another very simple example. This is an education program around invasive species. I think by now you're starting to get the flow of it. At the bottom, start at the bottom, council or district staff invest time and money. Educational programs provided, landowners will gain knowledge and take actions, and then invasive species will decline or not continue to grow. So again, a very simple logic model. You don't need all those fancy boxes. You can just show the path of your logic. Here's a very simple one that I did a couple of years ago with the group that was, I think it was the Mountain Caribou Recovery Team in Canada, and they were putting on snowmobiler workshops. So in this case, they went from the bottom up. The top is halting the decline in mountain caribou numbers, and that snowmobilers were a major contributor to that in this particular example. So they want to reduce snowmobile disturbance, and so that they were going to do some focus groups and some workshops and so on. So it's just another example of the same sort of process. So now, the world is not this linear or this simple. So people who are critics of logic model work often cite this issue. And any logic model that you're going to be putting together for any of your programs are not going to be this simple. They will definitely be more complex as you have multiple interventions or different ways that you're going to try and achieve the same outcome. So your logic model is going to have various levels or rows to it that all point to the same kinds of outcomes. But I wanted to start with this set of really simple examples so that you can build on that concept over time. So I've been given permission to share one of the more complex logic models that I've been involved with helping, and that's with the organization Solve, and I left the E off there purposefully because Solve used to be SOLV, and I worked with them 2011, 2012. And Deb Merchant, who is on this call now, was working for Solve at the time. I've asked her permission to unmute her, and when we show after I show you the logic model that we put together with them, I would love Deb to share the process that they went through, or at least to just share her reactions to the process. So if you have comments, reactions, questions so far, I'm going to take you off my sharing screen and pull up this Solve logic model because it was too big to put into a PowerPoint. So go ahead and Jerry, you can just read those comments off as I'm doing this.
The only comment we have is we've already talked with Neil. There are no other comments in the question box, so we're fine. And I have unmuted Deb.
Okay, good. All right.
Hi, Sean.
Hi. All right, I'm going to see if I can show my screen again. And Deb, this should start to look familiar, does it?
Oh, yes, you bet it
A little
does.
bit? Okay. So I'm going to, I won't be able to show you the entire thing. Let me see if I can maximize this. That might have helped a little bit. If you start down, they went from the bottom up, where their long term was up here at the top, and their activities were down at the bottom. And we decided to use this word CASA for the short-term outcomes, which is basically the learning changes. So knowledge, skills, attitudes, and aspirations, which is what people intend to do in the future. So the things that they do, we went through an exercise of listing out, okay, this was not a planning exercise. They wanted to retrofit all of what they were doing into their logic model to ensure that all the things they were doing made logical sense that would lead to their longer term outcomes. So we first listed out all the activities that they were doing: education and outreach, volunteer and donor recruitment, restoration, training and classroom materials, and so on. And from there, we basically had big index cards on a wall and started in together as a team, listing out, well, as a result of the things that we do, what are the short-term things that we are likely to observe, or we do observe? And then how do those things lead to behavior changes? And then how do those things lead to these larger outcomes? And if this is too small for you to see, it might well, depending on how big your screen is. I have posted this as a handout, so you can see, you can download it and have a look at it. I should say this is an old logic model. I don't know what Solve is using now, but it's a great example of one that that a team put together over a period of time. So Deb, I'm just going to hand it over to you. I gave Deb a heads up that I was going to be putting her on the spot. Tell us about just your experience doing this exercise and what it did for your team, or how you used it or how you didn't use it.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the interesting part about the entire process is that staff began to learn from each other how they were impacted by the work of others and how their work impacted others. So there was a real connectivity that we learned about each other. This helped us better understand how we were going to go forward and make decisions this particular outline helped our funders understand that very same information. And so I began to include it in funding proposals and had great response from funders. I think it's because they understood that we had done a great job of planning and that we knew what our intended outcomes were going to be. So while this is a complicated version of a logic, and sorry for my stuttering here, but there's a lot of feedback. Logic models do a great job of telling people outside of your organization what you are, what you're doing, who you are, and the impact you're going to have on the community. So if this can be put in a more simple form for external uses, then you'll have an easier job of fundraising, telling your story, and getting other people to volunteer and understand their role in the outcome of your work.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay, I just got the 10-minute warning from Jerry. Yeah, Deb, thank you so much for that. I could not have asked for a more, a better testimony than that. I'm reminded of a team that I worked with also in British Columbia. It was the Badger recovery team, and we went through an exercise similar to what we did with Solve, where we outlined the activities that they're doing, and then we looked for those linkages. We did it up on a wall, and we had everybody engaged in creating it. And by the end of the exercise, they realized that they could not make a logical link with one of their activities to their long-term outcome. They just struggled with where the arrows went. And somebody finally said, you know what? We should not be doing this kind of work, this particular exercise. I can't remember now what the exercise was that they were doing, but they could not make the link. So they ended up deciding to stop doing that one particular activity and moved some resources over to another. So just like what Deb just shared with us, it's a way of a team to come together and see how their activities relate to each other and relate to their long-term outcomes. So it's a planning tool, it's a sharing tool, and it is actually an evaluation tool. It allows you to begin to develop indicators. So behind each of these boxes, there are actually indicators that you could measure to determine whether or not those things were accomplished. So thank you so much, Deb. I'm going to just take a second and close this out, come back to our slide. Okay, so just a couple more thoughts about how logic models actually look. When you see them in grant proposals, they look every which way. There is no particular, like Neil was saying, there are many different ways of using the phrases and ways of showing it graphically. Some are circular, some are down the page, up the page, left, right, and center, and some of them are actually multiple levels, so that your individual program links up to, let's say each of your programs within your office may have their own logic model that then links up to an organization-wide logic model, and they all should support each other if they're done right and if your activities are actually supporting your long-term outcomes. So there's no right or wrong way to design a logic model. The main thing that holds all logic models together is this series of if-then links that pull the short and the medium and the long-term things together. Okay, in the let's see how much time I've got left here. So I want to introduce you to a sort of a specialized logic model, and this one had a huge impact on my work in Extension when I worked for Extension. This thing is called Bennett's Hierarchy, and Claude Bennett from USDA Extension Service in Washington, D.C. designed this thing back in the 70s, I think. He just retired a few years ago, and it kind of went viral within Extension. And what this model shows you, it's sort of a logic model. You'll begin to see that as you look through these various levels. But what this tells you is that there are actually there's a hierarchy of evidence. So let's say you've got a program and you want to tell the funder that the difference that you made. So you could report on what you spent on it, what activities the participants were involved in, who came and how many people. And then, but that doesn't really say much about the impact of your initiative. So as you start to climb up the ladder in reporting, you start to get more rigor. So you could answer the question how people reacted to it. Well, people thought it was really worthwhile and they really liked it. And that's a little bit more on impact, but you could do better. And so funders want us to be moving up the ladder as high as possible. The tension is that it's more expensive to collect data on the skills and knowledge and attitudes and what people aspire to do. And certainly behavioral changes and practices are more difficult, more time-consuming and expensive to collect data on. But the more you can think about pushing yourself up the ladder as you go through all of your programs, the more rigorous your outcome reporting is going to be. And this just provides one more tool for you to consider as you're talking to your staff and so on about where do you usually report. Are we usually reporting at level 3, or how can we start to move to level 5 and 6 in how we're reporting? So it's not a logic model as much as it is just a tool for you to think about the hierarchy as you report on outcomes. In the last couple of minutes I have left, and I promise that if you ask me to do another webinar on this particular topic going forward, I would love to do it. I'm a little geeky on this stuff. But this is how a logic model can help you move to the next level, not just communicating your theory of change, but how you can start to do data collection on whether or not you were successful. And again, I'll go back to this example. This is an education example. It's a very simple one. And those questions at the relate to each of those columns. Jerry says 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes. Good, thanks. Relate to each of these columns. So to what extent did knowledge and skills increase? For whom? What else happened? To what extent did behaviors change? For whom? Why? What else happened? And so on. So this is where you start to develop your evaluation questions. And then from there, so you see the evaluation questions there in the boxes underneath this logic model. From there, you can start to develop indicators that you actually want to go out and measure. So percent of people demonstrating changes, percent and number of people increasing their knowledge and skills, level of knowledge and skills, and so on. So this is a process by which you take a logic model that you've agreed upon and that you're working with, and then when you get ready to evaluate or really to talk about your impact, you're going to create evaluation questions to go with it. Now again, the higher or the farther to the right side that you can talk about your impacts or answer questions, the more rigorous you are. But this just gives you a framework to start with. So why bother with logic models? I've heard all of these comments in various workshops. It's a lot of work. You know, I'm right-brained. This is not for me. If we created one, what in the world would we do with it? And I think some of the things that Deb shared with us, you know, it provides language about the things that you do with your staff and with your external audiences. It increases understanding about the program and guides the work and helps you focus. It helps you improve as a team. Teamwork, staff motivation, helps you make you feel like you're part of a big machine that's really helping to make big differences. And funders like them. More and more funders are requiring them in grant proposals. And so if you can do some practicing now to develop these logic models, then you're going to be in a good position going forward. So these are some things I've heard in workshops, people, sort of the wow factor. Wow, I didn't know that's what my program is about. I've never seen our program on one page. We can do this. It took some time and effort. It took hours for us to do together, but it was worth it. It helped us build as a team and so on. So now I want to know what you think of logic models. Did you have the same kind of aha that I did as I first got in touch with these? Are you ready to run the other way? Is this old news? Really, I would love to have any of your feedback and comments on, well, I want your feedback on the delivery also, but I absolutely want to know whether you think that you would ever use this tool, what have you. So I'm just going to pause for a second and let you take a minute to write some comments about it. This is really cool. Will this sample model be part of the packet? I assume, Gail, you're asking about the solve one, and yes, it's listed as a handout. If you don't see what you want, by all means, email me. I'll put my email up on the screen in just a second. I like the visual impact these tools have. We've used them and they're great. They help us focus our work. It helps us write effective evaluations for programmatic direction. Well, can small organizations get help? We would have never been able to do this without facilitation. How do we find the resources to create and utilize them? Yes, I want to create one, but the resources are missing. Multiple examples are helpful. I can easily see how it would be useful in grant application and so on. I would love to do a workshop at one of our convenings that would bring people together to workshop together on their logic models. So if you start off trying to create one with your team and you want some input and help, we could do sort of a think tank together. I don't know, get in touch with me and let's just talk about it. If you think that you might want to go that route, absolutely, let's put some time into making it happen. I used this methodology in a grant a few years back, but I didn't know it was called a logic model. I'd like a handout on the examples. So if you want some more materials and examples, I encourage everybody to go to the University of Wisconsin Extension Program Planning and Development page, and there's the website there. They have great examples, and there's even a watershed example. And they have a brief online course you can take, and these are all free for the taking. And I can't think of a better single resource than this U of W extension initiative. And they have several evaluations folks on staff, and they have been promoting logic models for a long time. So, okay, so there's my phone number and email address. So I think we'll just end it here. And encourage you to follow up with me on any questions, comments, advice, feedback, etc. When we end the webinar, there will be I think it's 2 or 3 questions at the most, a feedback survey. So especially since it's our first one, we would love if you would just give us a little bit of feedback on how to make it better, how to make the materials accessible to you, and so on, because we want to keep doing this. And so we really need your input. So, all right, thank you everyone. I'm going to end it now unless there's any, we'll just wait one more second in case there's anybody who wants to raise their hands. Not seeing any, so unless I'm missing them. All right, we'll end it here. Thank you, everybody. Yes.
Last question. Is
Okay.
this, go over again when this will be posted for everybody?
You know, if I'm lucky, I'll post it this afternoon. If I'm not lucky, it'll be about tomorrow morning. Yeah. It's my first time posting it, so, well, you know what? Jason's here, so he can help me do it. We'll get it on this afternoon. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.